Previously on Transformers University, we checked out the first 10 episodes of the Transformers cartoon, and we met the entire voice cast for the season. Now, we head into the final 6 episodes on Transformers University. Hello, my friend, and welcome to Transformers University, a TFU.INFO podcast. I am your host, Anthony Brucali, and we have a packed show for you today. So before we jump right into it, we are going to be talking about the final 6 episodes of the Season 1 cartoon from 1984. And before we get into those episodes, and I've got a lot of great guests lined up for this show, I just want to say thank you to everyone who had a chance to check out our Toy Fair coverage, to check out our sister podcast, TFU News and Views, also hosted by me, and to check out the YouTube channel. So if you haven't been to the YouTube channel, swing on by youtube.com/TFU.INFO, TFU.INFO, and that is our home base on YouTube. And please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, and you want to listen to this on your favorite podcast app, you certainly can. It definitely usually goes up on the podcast feed before it hits YouTube. It's quicker to get it up there. So if you absolutely need to hear this first, please subscribe on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play, and if you are subscribed, please leave us a review, leave us a 5-star rating. All of that helps us get discovered and helps grow this show and helps me be able to do this more often and more frequently. All right, but enough housekeeping. Let's jump into what we're talking about today. And today we are talking about episodes 11 through 16 of Season 1. That would be The Ultimate Doom, Parts 1, 2, and 3, Countdown to Extinction, A Plague of Insecticons, and Heavy Metal War. And there are 2 of my all-time favorite episodes in this batch of shows, so we will get into those. And we're going to start with The Ultimate Doom. Now, The Ultimate Doom is an incredibly important piece of Transformers fiction because it is continually emulated by other things in the franchise. Just about every sequel to the original Michael Bay movie has kind of ripped off The Ultimate Doom. And so we start here. Before we get into the show, let's talk a little bit about the writers. Now, The Ultimate Doom was the brainchild of 3 writers that we've already spoken about. Dick Robbins, Bryce Malek, and Doug Booth. Now, while they're credited as the writers, there is somebody who on each episode credited with the teleplay. And in this one, it is Larry Strauss. Now, Larry Strauss didn't write all that much. He wrote an episode of the GoBots. He wrote an episode of the Transformers. He wrote an episode of the sitcom 227. And he wrote an episode of the sitcom The Facts of Life. And that's the important one because Larry Strauss is also an author. And in doing my digging around, he is the son of Hollywood composer John Strauss, who did some work on Amadeus and on the Blues Brothers, and Charlotte Ray, who is best known as Mrs. Garrett on The Facts of Life and Different Strokes. So there you have it. Mrs. Garrett's real-life son wrote most of this episode, or at least wrote the teleplay for The Ultimate Doom Part 1. And something to note from tfwiki.net, the fine folks there, this episode is actually entitled Brainwash on all the printed material that was given to the voice actors and such. So this episode starts with the Decepticons raiding a solar power station in India. And they attack the Maharaja, who is an Indian royalty figure. And the Autobots arrive on water skis, which I think is one of the weirdest things until we get to episode 3 of this 3-parter. And we get introduced to the Decepticons' new human ally, Dr. Arkeville. And he's never really explained, but he has this Operation Guinea Pig, where he is going to kidnap humans and implant what's called the hypno chip onto them and turn them into, quote, mindless slaves. So the attack in India is actually a diversion, so the Decepticons can attack the Autobot base and kidnap Sparkplug. So the Autobots head to the Decepticon undersea base to rescue Sparkplug and do so successfully. They bring him back to the base, and while they're being repaired, it turns out that Sparkplug is sabotaging all their weapons so that the Decepticons can attack. Spike and Sparkplug have this exchange, and Sparkplug wants Spike to join the Decepticons. And Spike refuses and then sets off the fire alarm and unleashes fire retardant foam. And as we've mentioned, that defeats just about everything except maybe cartoon nets in this universe. And the fire retardant foam fills the Decepticons' weapons. The Decepticons retreat, and Sparkplug willingly goes with them. And then we find out the Decepticons' plan is to space bridge all of Cybertron to Earth. And he has a 3-pylon space bridge. It's like a huge space bridge used to bring an entire planet to Earth. And the Autobots find out the plan. They attack the pylons, but it's too late, and Megatron has brought their home planet within the orbit of Earth. And that is basically where the episode wraps up. And this is a fun episode. Not nearly as fun as the middle episode of this trilogy, but definitely one of the more fun G1 Season 1 episodes. So we're left with Cybertron in Earth's orbit and what will happen next. And that takes us to the Ultimate Doom Part 2, the middle episode in the Ultimate Doom. On the script material, it's entitled Search, according to TF Wiki. And I guess technically this is the penultimate Doom, given it is the second to last part of the Ultimate Doom. Again, we have the triumvirate of Robbins, Booth, and Malik. And the teleplay for this episode is by Earl Kress, and he would go on to write 7 episodes of the Transformers G1 series, and he was a prolific and well-respected animation writer. He wrote Disney's Fox and the Hound. He did a lot of writing for Animaniacs and Tiny Toons and Pinky and the Brain, won 2 Emmys for some of that writing. And in a little interesting note, I was able to dig around and found out that he was a big fan of the Muppets. In fact, he was a uncredited Muppeteer on the original Muppet movie, and he performed Ernie and I think Bert in that movie, at least according to IMDb. I was only able to find him talking about performing Ernie. He kept a blog up until his passing in 2011 called My Name is Earl Kress, which you got to give him credit for. The name is pretty fun. That site is no longer there, mynameesearlkress.com. But if you use archive.org and hit up the Wayback Machine, you can actually go and find his posts. And he talks a bit about the animation writing industry, and he talks a bit about his time with the Muppets. And he also used to post to a Muppet board, message board called Muppet Central, and there he posted under the name Was Once Ernie. So if you're interested in finding more about Earl Kress, that's where to go. And it makes sense that such a well-respected writer penned one of the episodes I had alluded to earlier. This is one of the best and most important Transformers episodes of all time. This episode has so much in it, so much that says to me G1 cartoon, and has so much in it that I used to emulate as a kid playing with my toys. I really feel like a lot of the stories here are kind of timeless. They're kind of what made this show feel bigger than just being a cartoon. And first thing about this episode that sticks out to me, so one of the things this episode does is it explores the relationship between Spike and Sparkplug, father son. And this is kind of interesting because it clearly defines Spike as our human hero in this story and in all the future stories we will see in seasons 1 and 2. Yes, the Autobots are the heroes, but from the human perspective, Spike is certainly meant to be the viewer and meant to represent us and meant to make us feel whatever he's feeling. And it's interesting because he is clearly the hero in the hero myth. Now, I took a course when I was in college about myth and archetype in literature, right? And one of the archetypes is the hero, and the hero generally throughout fiction is usually missing one or both parents, or is not with their biological parents, and that's just kind of how it works. So think about it, right? Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter, Jon Snow. Like, you can even go back to like ancient Greek and Roman myths, like Hercules or Romulus and Remus, or more modern myths like Ted Theodore Logan and Bill S. Preston Esquire. All of them, they're missing a parent. And I think that is really important to note here. So Spike is that one. We never hear about Spike's mom. We never hear about Mom Witwicky. We don't even see one of those until the first Michael Bay film. So we don't know. And this carries into the comics too. We don't really find out about Buster's mom in there either. At least not to my recollection. Now, hey, if it does happen, you'll discover it with me as we get back through the Marvel Comics run. Okay, so what happens? So let's get into plot here. So in this episode, we start with Cybertron coming over the horizon dangerously close into Earth's atmosphere. And I one of the things I love about this episode is the direction, the art direction, and the angles used and the blocking used. It's really good, like scary good. How it looks in a lot of these scenes. The shot of Cybertron coming over the horizon is one of those really neat things, and we get the sense that this is dangerous to Earth, and it's bittersweet for the Autobots seeing their home planet, but not wanting to see their home planet. And so the Autobots and Decepticons fight. The Decepticons win thanks to Soundwave's audio disruptor waves, and forces the Autobots to retreat. Now, as I mentioned about playable moments, there's two that come up real quick in this one, and that is the Autobots convoy. They can't see because the atmosphere is too hard to drive in. The weather is bad. Every time I'm in really bad rainstorms, this scene tends to come to mind of Optimus and Ironhide and Jazz following each other super close because they can't see the road in front of them. And then Bumblebee, towards the back of the line, gets a flat tire and needs Spike to change it. And both of those scenes, I just remember as a kid emulating with my toys. And then Bumblebee and Spike get attacked by Laserbeak during an earthquake. Bumblebee falls into the crevice caused by the earthquake, and Spike is kidnapped by Laserbeak, which is then stopped by the Autobots by shooting him down. And guess who shoots him down? It is Bluestreak again. So I think that's our third count. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think it's the third time we've mentioned Laserbeak getting shot down by Bluestreak. And Hound, Bluestreak, and Windcharger go to rescue Bumblebee. Hound's got this two-handed metal detector, if you want to call it that. He holds it at a very strange angle, and as much as I'm talking about how great the shot blocking and angles are in this episode, this one I think they tried to get over on the kids and to the parents just to make it look a little awkward and keep the parents involved in watching. And then Windcharger rescues Bumblebee with his tractor beam. And then they drive off, and this is another weird moment in this, is that they transform Hound, Bluestreak, Windcharger. Bumblebee and Spike both hop into Hound. Bumblebee rides in his back seat, so it's a Jeep with a Volkswagen riding in robot mode in the back seat. Then the Autobots send the Dinobots to fight the natural disasters being caused by the gravitational changes with Cybertron being so close to Earth, and the Dinobots again. Again, another great playable moment in this episode. The Dinobots, for being really dumb characters and portrayed as dumb characters, they come up with some excellent solutions to stop some fires and flooding and everything else that's going on. We see Sparkplug's wrench that Spike takes with him, and that's important later on. And and you ever wonder what the sentimental value to that wrench must be? Maybe this ties back to Spike's mom. Maybe it doesn't, but we never really find that out. But the Autobot base, the volcano in the Autobot base becomes active, and again, we've got another playable moment where Skyfire rescues a bunch of Autobots who have been exploded out of the volcano, and Ironhide runs in and selflessly puts out the activity within the volcano. And then we get to find out that Optimus Prime is horrible at keeping secrets.
I'm not certain, but for the moment, I feel we must not let the boy find out.
Find out what?
Spike, we have information that Sparkplug has been taken to Cybertron.
Oh, come on, Optimus. Like, you just said we shouldn't let the boy know. He says, well, no, what? And you go, tell him everything? Like, make up your mind. If either you don't want to tell him, or you do want to tell him. I guess you made up your mind. But, oh my God, that scene just, it irks me for some reason. And then we get another great, Skyfire's cab service to Cybertron. And I just made that mistake, but actually in the original script, you find out that the original script had all the Skyfires listed as Jetfire. And I'll get into that in a little bit, because there's a place you can actually hear some of that audio. So Brawn, Bumblebee, Spike, Trailbreaker, and Wheeljack all hop in Skyfire and take the trip to Cybertron. And so while on Cybertron, Spike falls into a trap. It's followed by Bumblebee and Brawn, and they find themselves stuck in this ventilation shaft of sorts. And this is one of those things, I was watching this, and so they're looking for a way forward, and they walk forward, and then all of a sudden they fall through the ventilation shaft again and into the Decepticon base. And I said, this is weird. This feels like there was a deleted scene. And it turns out there was a deleted scene. So apparently from the point where they fall into this trap and the point where they fall through the ventilation shaft again, a self-defense mechanism of sorts, or some sort of base alarm system, had turned up the heat incredibly high in that little tunnel they were in, and it actually melts the floor out from under them, and that's how they fall into the Decepticon base. And you can actually hear the audio for that on YouTube if you check out, if you just do a Google search for Transformers at the Moon. It's a great site that if you're not familiar with it, you should go check it out. But they have this fantastic YouTube channel. They had acquired a whole bunch of audio. I think we played a clip in one of our episodes earlier. I don't want to lift their audio, but go check it out. That whole deleted scene is there in their Ultimate Doom Part 2 recording, and it makes this scene make so much more sense, because it really doesn't make sense otherwise. So they fall into the Decepticon lair, and Sparkplug is there. Spike tries to distract him with his wrench, but ultimately Sparkplug is still under the control of the hypnochips and sounds the alarm, and that's where this one ends. And there's just so much great and rich stuff in this episode. So we move on to episode 3 now. The Ultimate Doom Part 3 features a teleplay by Leo D. Paur, P-A-U-R. I couldn't find much on him, but he wrote and directed a film adaptation of the opera Rigoletto. This episode is entitled Revival, and something interesting I caught as someone who does video editing for a living. So the recap at the beginning of the episode here, it's, previously on the Transformers, Vic Caroli's got that big booming voice, and we get to see a whole bunch of scenes from the last 2 episodes. And one is that the scene of Bumblebee falling into the earthquake crevice, and then it's followed by a shot of the lava from the arc erupting, and then again a shot of Bumblebee falling, leading you to believe that Bumblebee fell into a pile of hot lava, which he didn't do at all, because those things took place in 2 different scenes. But getting back to the story, Brawn fights off a pair of Seekers that look like Thundercracker. One is light blue and one is dark blue, and neither of them are Thundercracker as far as TF Wiki notes. And then Wheeljack and Skyfire and Trailbreaker all arrive. They help save the other guys from Shockwave and the Decepticons, and they escape to find Wheeljack, to go hunt down Wheeljack's lab. In the scene, we have more Tetrajets, and those are important. You haven't seen those, I think, since the Rainmakers, or I was going to say the first episode, but I'm pretty sure the Rainmakers were the last time we saw the Tetrajets. And if you've been following our Toy Fair coverage, there's a good chance those might be getting toys next year. So swing on over to TFU News and Views and give that a listen. Our Toy Fair coverage had a little bit of that in it. They've only been hinted. There hasn't been photos, so please don't take that as abject fact at the moment. And while they're racing to Wheeljack's lab, and this is our second visit to Wheeljack's lab, they get followed by watchdog cars, which are just, I guess, Decepticon police cars. We don't know if they transform, but it's kind of interesting to note that we saw something very similar in the sticker adventure books that we covered a few episodes ago. And then after they get to the lab, the Autobots try to figure out a way to stop the hypno chips. And then we cut back to Earth to, well, you know what's coming next, right? Surfing Autobots. Yeah. That's exactly what you were thinking. It was surfing Autobots. Autobots on surfboards. Optimus Prime, Ironhide, Ratchet, Bluestreak, Prowl on surfboards riding a tidal wave. I don't know where this idea came from. I don't know who thought it was good. But they are racing to stop the Decepticons from collecting some of the energy from the tidal wave. The Autobots crash into the Decepticon outpost. There's a lot of chaos and it ensues. The Decepticons pretty much flee, and Starscream rescues Dr. Arkeville and takes him away. So then we head over to an island where Megatron is overseeing a shipment of Energon cubes and a Star Cruiser that will take him away from Earth, as he knows that Cybertron will eventually tear Earth apart, being so close. As he's there, Skyfire and the Autobots return from Cybertron, and Wheeljack has created a device to free the human slaves. Megatron flees with his ship and his Energon cubes to presumably wait things out on Cybertron, and Spike realizes that they just need to blow up Megatron's ship in order to knock Cybertron out of Earth's orbit, so all the Autobots fire upon the ship and blow it up, and Cybertron falls out of Earth's orbit, and that is the end of the Ultimate Doom. And if you think Megatron is dead, we are left to know that he survived the explosion and is floating through space like this. So that is where we are at the end of the Ultimate Doom, and I could go on a bit about the merits of this episode, but I will let Mr. Chris McFeely of Transformers The Basics talk just a little bit about it as well.
One of my favourite things about The Ultimate Doom is an extension of one of the things I enjoy the most about Season 1 as a whole, which is the fact there's kind of a loose story arc running through it that's all about the space bridge. And you get that run of episodes at the start of the season that are about setting it up and overcoming how hard it is to use. And then we get The Ultimate Doom taking it to the extreme, teleporting like a whole planet, Cybertron itself. You know, something so big that even the live-action movies would copy it. You know, space bridges were never that exciting again. And in between those episodes at the start of the season and The Ultimate Doom, we got Skyfire and the Dinobots. And The Ultimate Doom features all of them, really, you know, adding to the feeling it's a big, climactic storyline that's pulling together everything we've seen in the season so far. And it throws in that subplot and the epilogue centered on Starscream's treachery in a way that we've not seen since the pilot miniseries. which seems like it's taking his story to an ending as well. You have that bit at the end where Jazz says they won't see him for a while. It all adds up to like 4 episodes that make it feels like a multi-part season finale story, which is why I always thought it was really weird that it's not the season finale and there are 2 more episodes left.
And be sure to check out Chris's show, Transformers: The Basics, on YouTube. It is a phenomenal watch, and I'm so glad that the show has taken off. It is worth every second to watch every episode if you can. And if you like this show, you'll like Chris's show. And for one thing, Chris is one of the main writers of the TF Wiki. So if you like the voice and style of tfwiki.net, then you're probably already familiar with Chris's work. And so that moves us to the 4th episode, the epilogue, if you will, of the Ultimate Doom. And for this one, I know Chris mentioned it a little bit in his segment, and we're gonna jump to another special guest, and we're gonna send this one over to Eric Crownover of Steel City Bots, another podcast that you might enjoy. He is what I like to refer to as our resident young person. He is far younger than me and the guests I've had on the show. He's our Pete Davidson, if you will. And he is going to talk just a little bit about the next one, Countdown to Extinction.
So, as someone who was not born in the 1980s, but rather 1999, watching G1 is always very interesting. It's not my favorite show, but I certainly appreciate it so much for everything it's given us and all the characters, and it's just done. It started everything that we love and care about, and also some things we don't love and care about. But without this, we wouldn't have anything else Transformers. So I always find it interesting to watch G1, and also I always find it very funny. Not in a bad way, but it is very much a product of its time. To me, at least, it does not, I don't want to say it doesn't stand up to the test of time, because, I still enjoy it, but it is certainly obvious that it is no modern cartoon. It is very much an 80s cartoon specifically. But this episode is certainly no exception to that, because Countdown to Extinction gave me multiple laughs throughout. To start out, there's the whole assumption that Megatron's dead. Now Starscream's in charge. So Starscream takes Dr. Arkeville, and they go off to his laboratory, since he's now the leader of the Decepticons. My question is, why didn't he take any Decepticons with him? If he's all proud that he's the leader now, shouldn't he, gather the Decepticons together and lead them? I don't know. I just find that odd. Because he could have just gone rogue at any point, but now that he's leader, he's just abandoning them. But yeah, so they have this plan to blow up the Earth, and Starscream, they have this plan to use the generator, and Starscream's like, I'm going to blow up the Earth because that'll give me lots of energy. And Dr. Arkeville is very much not a fan of that, but we'll get to that later. But on Earth, Megatron returns to the Decepticons, saying, hey, I lived. And whenever he finds out about Starscream and Dr. Arkeville's, partnership, he sets off with the Decepticons to stop it. Now the Autobots detect the activity and they go after them, and every single one of them gets trapped in quicksand. Not like just the ones in the front, and then they have to rescue the ones in the front. No, everybody drives into the quicksand. But no worries. Ironhide has his handy-dandy liquid nitrogen to freeze them all. And they conveniently capture Laserbeak, who reveals, the Decepticons' plans, and the Autobots then follow go to the Doctor's secret laboratory. Now we get to the part where the Doctor is very much unhappy with Starscream wanting to blow up his planet, as one probably would most of the time. So he attempts to, rewire the systems, and It turns out that Starscream totally reprogrammed all the security so that he would just get electrocuted. He'd get fried if he used it and he wasn't, authorized. You'd think that Starscream would know like what dose to do to just, knock him out or something. But no, this clearly hurts him terribly, so much so that over half of his body has to be replaced with machinery, which I would assume is Cybertronian, since it's Cybertronian repairing him. But I don't know that for sure. I do find it interesting that this is really the first kind of hybrid of human and Cybertronian technology, assuming that the robot parts are Cybertronian. Whereas later on, we get a lot more human, robot fusing with, headmasters and stuff like that. But right now, this is the most we've gotten. So this is really the first example of a major Cybertronian human fusing. Afterwards, the Autobots and Decepticons both arrive there. And Megatron really wants the generator, not knowing what it is, and he fights Optimus Prime for it. And I really enjoyed this fight because it just seemed so awkward to me. It seemed like they were both just kind of like, I don't know, trying to dodge trying to fake each other out, maybe? I don't know. I just find it very funny to watch this fight. It seems very, like there's a lot of pauses between the two. Like they just kind of, have a long pause in between movements. But, it's very entertaining to watch. And then Shockwave tells Megatron, who he now knows is alive, that, hey, that thing's going to blow up the Earth. You might want to stop it. So Megatron decides to tell Prime, who now has the generator, that I need your help. We gotta shoot this thing into space so it doesn't blow up the Earth. Optimus Prime is fine with that, so Megatron transforms into a gun. Optimus Prime loads the generator into the gun, which, yes, that is clearly how that works. I'm just pointing out. Now at this point, Galvatron obviously didn't exist, but like with Galvatron, I feel like that'd make a bit more sense because it's a giant cannon that they could fit something in the barrel of. But a pistol, I don't know. I just they just squeeze it in. But that's just how it is. So that's funny to see, and they shoot it, and it goes off into space, and you know who it hits, of course. Because who else could it hit other than Starscream in a perfectly hilarious ending where, Starscream is just like, what's happening? Why isn't the Earth blowing up? Is my plan working? And then he just gets, blown off and flies down. And, of course, he lands there in front of Megatron, who is very much not happy. Megatron, drags him away, really angry. And then the Autobots are all wondering, I wonder what Megatron's going to do to Starscream. I bet it's nothing good. And they're just laughing about the fact that Starscream's going to get the crap beaten out of him by Megatron, which I found also very funny. Because this just shows that the Autobots, regardless of centuries and centuries of war with the Decepticons being mortal enemies, killing each other nonstop, they could still just have a joke about the others. I mean, of course, it is at Starscream's pain, but I still just think it's funny that they like to joke about, oh, man, that's Starscream. He's going to get beat up by that old tyrant Megatron. Like, I don't know. So overall, I just got to say this episode was very, very entertaining, and that is just part of the reason I adore G1 is because of all the characters it has given us, obviously. And while we have gotten more since, but obviously the majority have come from G1, and just how funny it is to watch. And again, not in a bad way at all. If you grew up with this and it was your childhood and you loved it, I totally understand why. It's awesome, robots transforming, and man, it is certainly something special, and I don't think there's anything anyone can deny. And Countdown to Extinction is a very good example of that.
And this is a very special episode. There's a couple of firsts in here. When Optimus fires Megatron, he pulls the hammer without a care, squeezes trigger that makes him man, and it is the first time they team up in Countdown to Extinction. It's also the first time Frenzy appears, which is clearly an ego boost for Rumble. Don't think twice. And kind of find it interesting that Dr. Arkeville gets turned into a cyborg. You know, he's part bionic and organic, and it's maybe he's not a cyborg, but he is certainly something. And you don't see him. He did get a toy in the early days of the Masterpiece line, and it's not really much. It doesn't have any posability, but it would have been neat to get him in that I don't know, that Psychotron kind of look. Now for this episode, the writers on this episode, there was a team of writers by the names of Reed Robbins and Peter Sallis. Now, I couldn't find much on either. They did both write together on Challenge of the GoBots, the direct competition. Now, Peter Sallis was the one I found the least on. He edited a film called It Came From Somewhere Else, which is a pretty low-end B horror movie from what I can tell. It may be in the vein of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I haven't really had a chance to watch it, but it is up on YouTube in its entirety for free, if that's your sort of thing. Now, Reed Robbins, on the other hand, has spent a career in the entertainment field doing web design as a composer, where he composed music for Sonic the Hedgehog and a number of other cartoons. And he is presently a author of children's books, including the titles Moe's Got B.O., Sue Hates Poo on Her Shoe, and Bart Can't Wait to Fart. And if I'd like to pick up any of these books, I will include a link in the description to where you can get these on Amazon. You can read these all on your Kindle. They're about $2 each. Eric, by the way, who covered this so nicely, the Crown Overlord, if you will, if you have some time, check out his podcast network, Steel City Bots. They do a lot of great stuff about Transformers and Star Wars. You can check that out on the iTunes, on the YouTubes, and on anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. And that will bring us to the next episode, A Plague of Insecticons. And that one is written by Douglas Booth, who we've touched on the last few cartoon episodes. And for more on that, we turn it over to my buddy Gabe, the Salty Seaman.
Hey folks, Salty Seaman here, playing another round of How Much Can I Ramble, and force Anthony to cut the majority of this out. Because today I'm going to be talking about a very interesting episode here, Plague of Insecticons. The whole feel of the episode, it feels a little off. I think I didn't catch the writer, but the writing felt a little different tone, just ever so slightly. But it's also first season, so they're still really getting their bearings on what kind of show they're going to be, and they're a lot more consistent by the second season. A few notes I caught watching. Activate. At one point, Megatron says, "Activate the Ravage cassette," which is a really odd turn of phrase. I don't remember him ever saying it that way in the past or any other episodes. There's a lot of this episode definitely is a toy selling episode. I mean, not that they're not all toy selling episodes, but I mean, this one really is like, okay, what do they want us to sell on these things? And it's like, all right, I'll write about that. We'll sell Hasbro a bunch of them. That really felt like the script. I mean, obviously you're introducing the Insecticons here, so new toys right off the bat, and of course they have all cool G-Wiz powers. You've also got ability to seemingly unlimitedly clone themselves, I guess, depending on how much energy they have, which seems to be a very useful power that you don't see a whole lot of. And I think it would have been one they would have used a lot more just for background filler, because there's so few Decepticons. But these are the Insecticons that most people are pretty familiar with. So they get a lot of cool. They get to sell their Cerebro shell. We get the Cerebro shells. We get the unlimited cloning. Lots of cool little nifty things. We get shrapnels. Verbal Tick repeats the last word of a sentence. which is one of my favorite, by the way. It's like one of my absolute favorite like verbal tics on the show. But you know, the Autobots are also shown to be you know, like Wind Charger's busting out his power, showing Wheeljack's rare memory that he can actually fly. He's one of like the few Autobots that can. Optimus Prime just being a badass, like just he's like, all right, you know, Sideswipe's doing his little gimmick thing, and he just like Prime's had enough. He's like, step aside, and he goes busting through a goddamn wall. It's fantastic. And then later he picks up a sunk oil tanker with just him and throws it at Megatron. I mean, Prime is, I said, of course you got Trailbreaker using his force field, but that's, you know, very common. But there's a lot of weapons and gadgets, and hey, isn't this cool? Buy our stuff. So I thought that's interesting. But weirdly, no Starscream, a very rare episode from the first 2 seasons that doesn't have Screamer showing up. Sparkplug's in it, but I don't think he speaks, so I think Chris Latta might have had the day off on this one. But it's very weird just seeing Thundercracker, you know, just kind of hanging around with Megatron instead of Screamer. I don't know. This also is on the island of Bali, which is part of Indonesia. I've been there twice. Visiting on a ship, I didn't realize, you know, there's farmland inside. Other than I rewatched this episode as an adult, I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, this is the basic story is the Insecticons like had apparently, I guess they were protoforms is the best way to describe it, because they escaped from the Nemesis before they boarded the Ark, the Autobot headquarters. Neither name is given in this, by the way. So this is much. Those names came a lot later. Spoiler alert. But they don't seem to remember being Decepticons. But they know what Autobots are. Like they call the Autobots by name when they first see them, and then they see Megatron, and they don't recognize him. So I'm a little fuzzy on that. And also, this is starting with the whole thing where the Insecticons are really kind of kept. They made a point they come from the same engineering, whatever that means, but. They are kind of separate from the Decepticons, at least initially. Obviously, by the movie, they're fully in, but yeah, they don't show up an entire ton in the cartoon. So it's a weird little thing, the divide. But I kind of like it. The Insecticons, you know, devour everything. They use crude oil, actual human type farm food. And crude oil. They apparently can consume anything. So I mean, these are, very powerful warriors given their gifts. And yeah, it's surprising they're not used more in the series. One of my favorite moments when they were attacking the farmland, like one of the Bali farmers, just like I can't remember, is like monsters attack from the. It was a very erudite like statement from a farmhand, you know. Like he's almost, you know, doing some Shakespeare out here describing his peril. I really like that guy. This shows a lot of jokes, and you know, some of them are actually fairly good. There's also some kind of like very deadpan deliveries. Like the whole voice recording of this episode feels a weird, like disjointed, possibly chopped up. Because there's a disconnect between a lot of the lines spoke. You know, I think back then you can tell the episodes where everyone's in the same room and they're feeding off each other versus when they kind of put it together. Sometimes you can feel that disconnect, and I really feel that in this episode. But it's kind of it makes it funny on like a different kind of meta level. I enjoy it. I actually really enjoy it. There's a pretty funny one last thing, pretty funny scene where Megs just like takes his cannon off and he's sitting there leaning. You know, like he's a kid from the hood against the wall of the tanker, just chilling. It's only for 3 seconds, and the Autobots show up. But it was just, I really love that picture. I'm surprised I've not seen that as more for an Avatar, because he is so chillaxed, just watching the Insecticons get down in some crude oil. Fine first season episode. Enjoyed it a lot. I think this is one of the ones I used to see a lot on reruns as a kid, so a lot of it came back to me really well.
And if you like Mr. Salty over there, check out his YouTube channel, The Salty Seaman. You can give him a look, and talks about all things Navy related. You've heard him on this show before, and you will certainly hear him again. A couple things that he left out of the recap that I thought are fairly interesting is that one, This episode starts in Bali at a place called Demon Swamp. And man, I think I saw them open for Slayer back in the 90s, and they were awesome. The Insecticons are also incredibly hungry Insecticons, if you will. And they arrived on Earth via the Decepticon escape module, as Megatron points out. And Thundercracker mentions that they have idento-computers, which is what just gave them insect modes. And I'm just kind of interested to know more about those. I mean, now we've seen, in the original pilot, that Teltran 1 gave everyone their alternate modes. So it's just interesting to note that bit of Transformers biology. Another piece of impossible physics that I always enjoy about this show, Jetfire and company flew to fight the Decepticons in Bali, and the rest of the Autobots drove to Indonesia from Oregon. And made it there almost in the same amount of time. And I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about. Oh, and the final bit of this episode. So the way the Autobots defeat the Insecticons. So the Insecticons use lightning as a way to increase shrapnel's power. And the Autobots realize that if they transform into vehicle mode, their rubber tires give them insulation. And I don't know if that is actually scientifically something that would work. Like if your car gets hit by a bolt of lightning, I don't know if your tires insulate you or not. I remember there being a bit of urban legend behind that. So hit me up on Twitter at TFU_info. Correct me if that is wrong, and let me know if that actually, don't let me know if that actually works. Don't go out and do it yourself. But do tell me if that is just TV nonsense or not. And one last note about this episode that is really important is that this was the final episode to air in 1984. It's not the final episode of the season. It actually aired after the season finale. It aired out of order. So this aired in late December of 84. And the next episode, Heavy Metal War, aired in mid-December. And this one is the other one I was talking about when I talk about my all-time favorite Transformers episodes. This one is certainly up there. This one is written by Donald F. Glute, who we had talked about in the previous episode. And for more on this, I turned to a good friend of mine, Mr. Dave DeSegli of D Square Productions. And Dave and I, we go back to when we were teenagers. Probably, I was 14 or 15 when I met Dave. We met riding bikes to the comic book store to pick up Infinity Gauntlet number 4 via mutual friends. And Dave and I have been friends ever since. And you may know Dave as the mastermind behind D Squared Productions and their work for woodrocket.com. If you're under 18, do not look that up. If you're over 18, do look that up, and you'll probably get a good chuckle out of some of those songs at the very least. Dave has been a prolific vocalist in his career, so you can check out some of his former bands, because we love the heavy metal, me and him. He was in a band called November Kills. He was in a band called After the Bath. He was in a band called Someone Else. And I know he listens to this show because he texts me every time an episode goes up. And one day I will tell his story of renting Transformers the movie on here, but not today. So I reached out to Dave because I wanted him to talk about Heavy Metal War, and he got back to me with a full-on original rap song about the episode.
Man, I love this episode. When I saw it as a kid, I nearly blew my load. Megatron on the endless search for Energon sends in the shiesty Constructicons to do what construction workers do. Bend the rules with these heavy metal tools and propose the only way to stop the war is a battle to the death. That's Cybertron law. Now, with the strength of all powers combined, they scheme to exile the Autobots in prime. It's so deceptive, but it all worked out. They rolled out, figured out what the plan's about, and with the help of Teletron 1 and the Dinobots, they just foiled the plot. Now with a little trickery of their own, created a hologram and sent Devastator and a crew home.
We shall rise again.
And there you have it. And that pretty much sums up Dave in a nutshell. I give him an episode called Heavy Metal War, and he comes back to me with a rap song. But if you like Dave's work, you can also check him out in his new project, Rob Boss, with a couple other friends of mine. It is the rap version of Bob Ross, and they have their new single out and video up on YouTube called Let Your Beard Grow. So go check that out. It's a fun song. So let's talk about a couple of the important things in this episode, and I will kind of give more of a breakdown of how this show goes. We start with the Constructicons, and this is their first appearance, and they are attacking a construction site to steal an energy disk and a power converter. So clearly this is Tashi Station. They successfully steal that stuff, and then we cut back to the Decepticon base, where we find out that Megatron has built these Constructicons in this cavern. They are building a machine for Megatron to use to transfer the abilities of all of his Decepticons to him via their power chip rectifier. So apparently the power chip rectifier is what gives each character their unique abilities, such as Skywarp's teleportation or Starscream's cluster bombs. And Megatron flies to the Autobot base to challenge Optimus Prime into a fight via the Cybertronian Code of Combat, which is a law. And so Optimus must fight him, and the loser will be exiled from Earth to deep space, and the winner will get to stay in the place of their choosing. This is by far one of the most playable moments if you were a kid in the 80s playing with Transformers, because the scene itself is just fantastic. It's both sides just kind of create like a circle to sit in and watch this fight unfold. And Megatron and Optimus fight, and Megatron kicks the crap out of Optimus. And one of the neat things he does during this fight is he uses the cannon that is on his shoulder, swings it around like the toy would, and shoots it from his hip. Meanwhile, the Constructicons are tunneling under the Autobot base in order to destroy Teletran 1 and keep the computer from discovering what Megatron has done. During this scene, there's an interesting moment where one of the Constructicons is called Scrounge, who is not any of the Constructicons, and is actually a character we'll meet in 85 in the Marvel Comics. Now Optimus loses the battle. Another interesting little thing here that you couldn't really do with the toys, but was just interesting to see, was Huffer takes Optimus's trailer back to base with him. As the Autobots are heading back to base, Teletran 1 senses the intruders and activates the Dinobots to fight the Constructicons. Optimus ignores this fight on the way into the base, citing the law as the reason for not helping the Dinobots. And they get inside, the Autobots do, and they get repaired. Now, outside, the Constructicons transform in two phases, Phase 1 and Phase 2, another playable moment, to form Devastator, the first combiner we will see in the Transformers series. And Devastator and the Dinobots fight as the Autobots realize that they have been duped and that Megatron had stolen his powers and fought unfairly. And so the Autobots realize that the law no longer applies to them, and they run out to help the Dinobots. Now, the Autobots use a hologram of a giant Autobot who eventually would get a name, Holonix Maximus. I mentioned him in the Meet the Cast Part 2 episode back a few episodes ago. He was voiced by Peter Cullen and eventually got a name in retrospect. But the hologram does enough to distract the Decepticons so that the Autobots could fire on Devastator and Megatron and the rest of the Decepticons, pushing them back into a pool of lava where everyone falls in. And Megatron reaches out and says, "We shall rise again," before falling into the lava. And that is where Season 1 ends, with a possible Autobot victory and a clean place to wrap it up if there wasn't a Season 2. But we do know there was a Season 2, as the show was incredibly successful. And we will get to that as this show goes on. And that will wrap up this episode of Transformers University. I want to thank all of my guests, Gabriel Owens, the Salty Seaman, Chris McFeely of Transformers The Basics, Dave DeSegli of D2 Productions, and Eric Crownover, the Crown Overlord of Steel City Bots. Of course, if you like the show, please like and subscribe wherever you enjoy podcasts. If that's on iTunes or Google Play, make sure you give us a rating. If that's on YouTube, please subscribe and help us out there. And of course, you can always help out the site by going to TFU.INFO/help. And there you'll find a list of a lot of images that we need for the toy archive. And if you want to just help us out with a little bit of financial help, swing on by to TFU.INFO/Amazon. And everything you order after that, Amazon sends us a couple of pennies and dimes to help with production costs on this end. You can catch us on Twitter at TFU_info, on Facebook at facebook.com/TFUinfo, on YouTube at youtube.com/TFUinfo, and on Instagram at TFU.info. Of course, if you want to just email me, it's info@TFU.info. And until next time, see ya.